Today, I'm going to start a two-part cultural section on two plays by William Shakespeare that speak into this moment of transition when institutions fall apart. There's no question that they speak directly into this moment. Today, I'm going to start by talking about King Lear. Now, King Lear is the Sistine Chapel of literature. It is the greatest work by the greatest practitioner in his field, right? It's like the Sistine Chapel, like your first kiss. It is one of the very few things in life that is every bit as good as people say it is. And I'm going to give it a reading here. I'm not going to tell you what King Lear is about, because Shakespeare is much more complex than that. I'm going to talk about something that I see in King Lear, right? And that is the story of our times, so the story of the end of an age and the dysfunction and horror that arise when the next generation has not been trained up to take control of the leadership, right? When the old king is standing down, just like now, but a generation is standing down, but the young people are not trained in the traditions that they need to become the leaders. Now, a lot of people read King Lear and they say it's a nihilist play because every bad thing that can possibly happen happens in it. So it depicts life without hope. It's really depressing. But Shakespeare is a lot more interesting than that. He depicts specific situations, and if terrible things happen in them, it's largely because of the choices and the actions people take and the characters of those people. So he's not saying, in my opinion, he's not saying life is a nihilist tragedy. He is saying, if this happens, then life is a nihilist tragedy. So, people want their stories to have redemptive endings. King Lear does not have a redemptive ending. It is a very, very sad, depressing play, but it is also one of the greatest plays. And it's about the end of an age. And it was written toward the end of Shakespeare's relatively short life. He only lived till about 52, I think it is. And the Elizabethan age, when he wrote King Lear, this is the best dating we have, the Elizabethan age was ended. And it ended on a down note. She was a great queen for part of her reign, but she kind of lost her grip. Sir Walter Raleigh called her a lady surprised by time. She had gotten old and she had lost her grip, and her court began to devolve into factionalism and corruption. And because she'd been the Virgin Queen, famously, there was no descendant to replace her, and they had to bring in the King of Scotland. And that ultimately, at first that was a hopeful thing, but ultimately led to disaster. So the story of Lear is based on a legend. It takes place in England, but centuries before the birth of Christ. So it takes place in kind of like the unknown past, right? And the 80-year-old King Lear decides that he is going to step down and spend the rest of his life. He says he's going to crawl toward death without the care and worry of being king anymore, but he's going to divide his kingdom among his three daughters, right? And in order to give his daughters this kingdom that they're desperate for, he calls on them to express their love for him. Tell me how much you love me, and that's how much land, part of my kingdom, I'm going to give you. He wants to be flattered as if he is king, because he's giving up his kingdom, he's giving up his power, but he wants them to just say how much they love him. So two of his daughters, both married, Goneril and Regan, get up and they just say, "Oh, we love you more than love can possibly. We love only you. Our only pleasure is loving you. That's all we love." And he gives them each a part of his kingdom. And like I said, this comes from a sort of a fairy tale type legend. But his favorite daughter, his youngest daughter, Cordelia, is too honest. And she says, "I love you like a daughter loves her father. You've raised me, you've loved me, you've nurtured me, and I love you as a daughter, as a father deserves." And Lear, who is living off this flattery, just explodes with rage, and he disinherits her. And she's only salvaged by the fact that the King of France is a noble guy who sees what a valuable person she is and marries her even without a dowry, because now she has nothing and she becomes Queen of France. But Regan and Goneril divide King Lear's kingdom between themselves, and they are now supposed to take care of their father while he lives out his retirement. Now, when I say this is the story of our times, I don't mean like in an easy way. I'm not being simplistic about it, but I have to say there are some kind of comic similarities between Lear's world and our own. The king is 80. He is described as a very foolish, fond old man. Fond means silly. And obviously, Joe Biden is a foolish, fond old man about the same age. The gender roles are out of joint throughout the play. The wives are bossing the husbands around and manipulating the husbands, and the men are suffering from what was called hysterica passio, which was a kind of panic attack, which which was said to be caused by the womanish vapors of the womb rising toward the heart, and that's happening to Lear. And the play even contains, I swear this is true, I couldn't make this up, it contains a murder to cover up a massive conspiracy where they hang Cordelia in prison and pretend it's suicide. So like Jeffrey Epstein, Cordelia didn't kill herself. But more seriously and generally, it's this moment of transition when an age comes to an end and what that means and what happens if the next generation is corrupt and unwilling to do the job of being leaders and reigning in an honest way. And so the idea, it's funny, this idea was actually, putting King Lear aside for just a minute, this was actually in that movie Rian Johnson made, Knives Out. It was the same story. It was a kind of King Lear story where a generation of people who were living off the father's wealth had become corrupt and wanton and decadent. And so the big house had to be turned over to the daughter of the illegal immigrants so she could bring the old values in a new way, right? That's what you're looking for. You're looking for old values brought in a modern way. And King Lear is in a similar predicament that his daughters have been spoiled and they're corrupt and they're, decadent sexually, and they're bullying their husbands around. And now he's given them power over him. So he wants to continue to behave like a king and he wants to be flattered. And when he when he exiles Cordelia and disowns her, his friend, Kent, stands up for him. This is the Earl of Kent, and they're old friends, and listen to the way Kent speaks to him. This is from the Anthony Hopkins Amazon Prime version. Hopkins is great in this. And Kent speaks to him like an honest man speaks to another man, even though he is the king, and King Lear banishes him. It's cut 7. And I'll talk about it afterwards.
Be Kent unmannerly when Lear is mad? What wouldst thou do, old man? Thinkest thou that duty shall have dread to speak when power to flattery bows?
Kent, on thy life no more.
My life I never held but as a pawn to wage against thine enemies.
Out of my sight, dear sir, forbear.
See better, Lear.
Now by Apollo.
Oh, now by Apollo, king. Thou swearest thy gods in vain, I tell thee, thou dost evil.
Hear me, recreant, on thine allegiance! Hear me!
So he says, Kent says, I will be unmannerly when Lear is mad. And this is something we're familiar with, right? That the truth has now taken second place to good manners. It's not good manners to tell the truth. It's not good manners to say that a transgender person is mentally ill or that a black neighborhoods have too much crime, and that's not the police's fault. It's unmannerly, and so you don't say it. And that's what has happened. The truth is banished, and everywhere the truth is banished. And so you have people, when the truth is banished, people go blind, and blindness is one of the themes of the play. You have the Earl of Gloucester, who has a bastard son, Edmund, and Edmund is bitter because the sexual social constructs make him less powerful than his brother, who's legitimate, right? And he says, so why am I a bastard? By nature, I'm just as good as anybody. And he says, nature will be my goddess. Here's that.
Thou, nature, art my goddess. To thy law my services are bound. Wherefore should I stand in the plague of custom, and permit the curiosity of nations to deprive me? For that I am some 12 or 14 moonshines lag of a brother? Why bastard? Wherefore base? When my dimensions are as well compact, my mind as generous, and my shape as true as honest madam's issue, why brand they us with base?
So basically he's saying, nature will now be my goddess because I'm as good as anybody. These social rules are bad. And this is a big theme of the play. Should man be stripped down to his basic self? This is what happens throughout the play. Now, he plots against his brother, whose name is Edgar. His name is Edmund, and his natural brother, his legitimate brother, is named Edgar. And so you can tell they're basically two parts of the same person. Edmund wants to live in nature and just have no social or civilizational restraints, like transgender people say, and all the sexual deviant things that are now supposed to be absolutely fine. And there's not supposed to be any social restriction. Everybody's supposed to be natural. And Edgar still remembers what it means to be a civilized person constrained by civilized ideas. But what happens to Edgar is he strips off his clothes and he runs off naked and pretends to be a madman because Edmund has set him up to be killed. And Gloucester is blind to this plot. And this is the thing, blindness and nature, right? So as Lear goes to his daughters start to turn against him. And Lear is an annoying character. He's your father. He shows up with his 100 knights and he makes a mess and he bosses your servants around. And so these two corrupt women start to strip him of his knights. And that is the symbol in the play of being stripped down. He has 100 knights. They take away 25. Then they take away 50. Then they take away all of them. They take away all of them. And one of his daughters says to him, Regan says to him, "Why do you need even one knight? Why do you need any knights?" And this is Lear's response, cut 9.
Oh, reason not the need! Our basest beggars are and the poorest things superfluous. Allow not nature more than nature needs. Man's life's as cheap as beasts. Thou art a lady. If only to go warm where gorgeous, why nature needs wealth, but thou gorgeous worst, which scarcely keeps thee warm.
So what he says is reason not the need, which means don't ask me why, I need it. We need more than nature gives us. We need more than nature gives us, or we become beasts. He says, you're a lady because you wear things that don't even keep you warm. They're just beautiful. It's just a luxury. The civilization has added things to it. What do you become when all that is taken away? Nature is not so good, right? So this takes us into basically, Lear runs away. He runs away from his daughters, and he runs out onto a heath where there's a big storm. And this is maybe the greatest scene in all of literature. It is one of them. You can just almost see inspiration hitting Shakespeare like a lightning bolt, right? He's out there in this storm, which is nature, right? Nature doesn't care about us. Nature just will wipe us away like that. There is no morality to nature. And he's out there shouting at the storm as if he has some control over it. And he finds himself, he's out there with his fool, who is the only person who can speak the truth to him because he turns his truth into jokes. And the only way Lear can hear the truth is in the form of jokes. So basically, Lear is listening to the show. So Lear, I knew I had a role in this play somewhere. Lear is out there with the storm, and he runs into Edgar, who is hiding out as this naked madman, right? And Lear looks at him, this naked man in the midst of this storm, and he stops, and Lear says, "Is man no more than this?" He says, here we are, we're all sophisticated people, but thou, speaking to this naked man, he says, thou art the thing itself. Unaccommodated man is no more but such a poor, bare, forked animal as thou art. And Lear strips off his clothes. So now Lear is naked in the middle of the storm, and he says, leave me alone, I want to pray. Now this scene is frequently cut. There's a long play, it's frequently cut. I believe it's the moral center of the play. It's literally the center of the play. I mean, this is the moment when Lear is stripped of everything. He was a king a couple of scenes ago, and now he's out on a heath naked, right? And he prays. And this is what he prays. He suddenly realizes that he's cold and it's raining on him and he's naked. And he says, poor naked wretches, wheresoe'er you are, wherever you are, that bide the pelting of this pitiless storm, how shall your houseless heads and unfed sides, your looped and windowed raggedness, defend you from seasons such as these? What happens to the poor when they're out in this weather and they have no clothes and they have no houses? What happens to them? And he says, it's a great line. He says, I've taken too little care of this. He suddenly realizes as king, he didn't pay attention to the poor. And he says, take physic pomp, which means heal yourself. The highborn people, the luxury people have to heal themselves. Expose thyself to feel what wretches feel, and thou mayst shake the superflux to them. These are liberal lines. This is saying the state should give some money to the poor, should pay attention to the poor. So stripped of everything, he is basically talking to Jesus. This is before Jesus has come to earth, but basically he has discovered the philosophy of Jesus. And he says we should make sure that the poor are taken care of to show the heavens more just. What he is saying here is that nature is merely nature, but we are that part of nature that communicates God's will and charity and justice into the world. That is what civilization is meant to do, and that is why you don't strip civilization away, and that is why civilization is better than indigenous life, than native life, than savage life. Civilization is where God's will is created in the world. We are the part of the creation that creates, and this is what happens. People say that Shakespeare is not not a religious writer, but I just think what he does is he pours religion out into the world. He takes it away from the churches, he takes it away from theology, and he just shows you it operating in the world. Now, the tragedy just gets worse and worse in this play. Everything gets worse and worse. Gloucester, who was blind to the conspiracy, literally has his eyes put out. And what happens in the play is all the metaphors become real. So he was blind, and now his eyes are put out. It's a horrific scene, any way you play it, because it's right on stage all the time, but it's a horrific scene because it is the opposite of Christianity. When you get to the nadir of the play, the bottom of the play, it's the opposite of Christianity. Christ gives sight to the blind. Now, in a state of nature, man goes blind, takes out other people's eyes, right? Lear, who has been talking about being mad, goes mad. The sisters who have dominated their husbands are suddenly swept away, dominated by their own lust. In the end, there's a moment when Lear and Cordelia are sent to prison, when Lear has this kind of revelation of what life could be like if we lived in a godly way. And he says to her, "Come, let's away to prison. We two alone will sing like birds in the cage. When thou dost ask me blessing, I'll kneel down and ask thee forgiveness. So we'll live and pray and sing and tell old tales and laugh at gilded butterflies and hear poor rogues talk of court news." They'll talk about who's up and who's down. And we will talk upon the mystery of things as if we were God's spies. So it's a brief vision of the life of wisdom, seeing the passing emergencies in the passing world, the people rising and falling, and seeing them through God's eyes, right? And so it reminds me of a line in the mystic poet William Blake, who said, "All throughout eternity, I forgive you, and you forgive me." And that's basically what they're talking about. But it's too late. Things have gone too bad, and everybody winds up dead, right? And the last part of the play, Lear comes in with the dead Cordelia in his arms, hanging like Jeffrey Epstein, and he can't believe she's dead. And this is the part about whether Shakespeare is a nihilist or not. He's shouting, he can't believe she's dead, and he screams, no life. Why should a dog, a horse, a rat have life, and thou no breath at all? Thou'lt come no more. He says, never, 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 never. This whole speech is filled with negatives. He says, and then he says, "Pray you undo these buttons," because he starts to have a heart attack. He basically starts to die, and he asks somebody to open his shirt, and he starts to look at Cordelia and think he sees life. And he says, "Do you see this? Look on her. Look, her lips. Look there, look there." Now, this scene can be played in two ways, and I've seen it played both ways. He's either looking at her lips and thinking that she's coming back to life, and then he dies, and so he's deluded, and so the resurrection is deluded. But I've also seen it played where he's talking, and suddenly he looks up in front of him, and he says, look there, as if he sees her waiting for him on the other side. So we just don't know. We don't know what Shakespeare was saying in that moment. It's impossible to know. But the last line of the play goes to Edgar, because Edgar comes back and sets the state right again and begins the new regime, finally. This man who has held onto civilization, even in his nakedness, even as the institutions collapse, he has held on to his ideas. He says, "The weight of this sad time we must obey, speak what we feel, not what we ought to say." So the truth is coming back into the world. And he says, "The oldest has borne most. We that are young shall never see so much, nor live so long," because they have had this long regime like the baby boomers. And now it's over, and now they're going to have to rebuild. And rebuilding is a happy task, but it is a hard task, and there's going to be trouble, and they probably won't live as long as Lear lives. So the question becomes, is this moment of transition that we are in right now, we are in a Lear-like moment of transition, is it doomed to Lear-like tragedy? And so next week I want to look at Lear's twin play, which is The Tempest, which in many ways is the same story as Lear, except it has a happy ending. It's what's called a comedy of grace. It's a story in which tragedy could happen, but somehow it doesn't. That's like the story of the crucifixion. The crucifixion is a comedy of grace because it's tragic, but through God's grace, somehow it has a happy ending. And hopefully the story of these times we're living in now will be a comedy of grace. We'll look at The Tempest next time. Wasn't that great? Of course it was. You want more? Sure you do. Like and subscribe to The Andrew Klavan Show wherever you get your podcasts.